He was the man no one wanted to serve. Damien Blackwood, a name whispered with a mixture of awe and terror in the service industry. A billionaire whose fortune was matched only by his cruelty. At Chicago's most exclusive restaurant, Ethelgard's veteran waiters would suddenly fall ill, trainees would vanish, and even the stoic manager would pale at the sight of his reservation. They called his table the executioner's block. So when every single server refused to approach him, who would have thought a new waitress barely a month on the job would not only walk willingly into the storm, but change the very course of his life with a single calm reply? This isn't a story about service. It's a story about salvation secrets and the staggering price of hidden grief. The air in Ethelgard's was usually a finely tuned symphony of quiet confidence, the gentle clinking of Villeroy and Boch china, the hushed murmur of Chicago's elite, the distant rhythmic ballet of the kitchen staff. It was all part of a carefully constructed illusion of effortless perfection. Tonight, however, a discordant note of pure, undiluted panic had crept into the orchestra. It was a Tuesday, typically a slower evening, but the reservation list held a name that could curdle the most expensive bottle of Chateau Margaux with its mere presence: Damien Blackwood. Amelia Vance, still new enough to feel the starched collar of her uniform against her neck, was polishing wine glasses behind the service bar, observing the subtle shift in the restaurant's atmosphere. She had been at Ethelgard's for precisely 28 days. Long enough to learn the intricate floor plan and the nuances of the 80-page wine list, but not long enough to understand the almost primal fear that had gripped her colleagues. Jessica, a waitress whose nerves were perpetually frayed, was twisting a napkin in her hands, her face ashen. "He's confirmed," she whispered to Robert, a veteran server, with a face like a road map of long nights and disappointing tips. "Henderson just got the call from his assistant. ETA 30 minutes. Robert let out a low groan, placing a tray of empty water goblets down with more force than necessary. "There goes my night. Might as well just clock out and take the loss." "You can't," Jessica hissed. "Remember what happened to Patrick? He claimed his old back injury was flaring up the last time Blackwood was booked. Henderson saw him carrying groceries the next day. Fired on the spot for unreliability." Amelia paused, her polishing her curiosity piqued. She'd heard the name Blackwood in hushed tones over the past few weeks, always attached to stories of epic tirades and impossible demands. He was a phantom, a boogeyman for the staff. According to restaurant law, he once made a sommelier cry for recommending a wine that was, in his words, as insipid as your taste in neckties. He had reportedly sent back a steak 7 times, claiming the molecular structure of the sear was compromised. "Is he really that bad?" Amelia asked quietly, her voice a stark contrast to Jessica's panicked squeak. Jessica looked at Amelia as if she had just asked if water was wet. "Bad, Amelia, he's a soul destroyer. He doesn't just want service, he wants submission. He finds your weakest point, that tiny insecurity you hide from the world, and he presses on it with a billion-dollar thumb until you shatter." Robert snorted, wiping down his section with grim determination. "She's not wrong, kid. The man doesn't just dine, he lays siege. Last time he told me my posture suggested a lifetime of accepting mediocrity. Who says that? The restaurant manager, Mr. Henderson, a man whose tailored suit always seemed a size too tight when he was stressed, emerged from his office. His face was a mask of strained professionalism, but his eyes darted around the room like cornered animals. "Team," he announced, his voice a little too loud. "Mr. Blackwood will be joining us this evening. Table 12 as usual." A collective silent groan rippled through the staff. Table 12 was the most secluded booth in the restaurant, offering privacy and a commanding view of the entire dining room. It was also affectionately nicknamed the Gulag by the servers. "I will need a dedicated server for the table." Henderson continued his gaze, sweeping over his experienced staff. Robert suddenly became intensely interested in a microscopic smudge on a fork. Sorry, Henderson. I've got the 6 top of investors from Sterling Thorne's company. They're regulars, you know how particular they are." It was a flimsy excuse. Everyone knew Robert would rather serve a table of hungry bears. Sterling Thorne was Blackwood's biggest corporate rival, a fact that added a delicious layer of irony to Robert's excuse. Henderson's eye twitched. Jessica visibly shrank. I have that anniversary couple at table 7. They specifically requested me. Very sentimental, high maintenance." She trailed off, her voice barely a whisper. One by one, Henderson went through his roster of senior staff, and one by one they produced increasingly elaborate, almost comical excuses. A suddenly remembered allergy to the type of flower in the table's centerpiece. A migraine that was just beginning to bloom behind the eyes. A wrist sprain that would make carrying the heavy plates impossible. Amelia watched the pathetic display with a strange sense of detachment. She had spent 2 years in medical school before her mother's illness forced her to drop out and find work to support her family. She had dealt with arrogant surgeons, terrified patients, and grieving families. She had seen real pressure, real suffering. The prospect of serving a rude billionaire seemed by comparison manageable. He could insult her posture, her intelligence, her very existence. But his words were just sounds. They couldn't reopen her mother's surgical wounds or pay the mountain of medical bills on her kitchen table. Henderson was sweating now, his professional veneer cracking. "So let me get this straight. My entire senior staff is suddenly incapacitated. On a Tuesday night." His voice was laced with a desperation that was painful to witness. The restaurant couldn't afford to refuse Damien Blackwood. The man's patronage was a status symbol, his presence a tacit endorsement that brought in other high rollers. Silence. The only sound was the hum of the wine fridge. Then a clear, calm voice cut through the tension. "I'll do it." Every head turned towards Amelia. She stood by the bar, a freshly polished wine glass in her hand, her expression unreadable. She hadn't been asked. As a junior server, she wasn't even in the running. Henderson stared at her dumbfounded. "You, Amelia?" "Yes, Mr. Henderson," she said, placing the glass carefully on the rack. "I'll take table 12. Jessica looked at her with a mixture of pity and horror, as if Amelia had just volunteered to be launched into the sun. "You don't understand," she mouthed silently. Robert shook his head slowly. "The kid's got guts, I'll give her that, or she's a fool." Henderson out of options, and Time looked at Amelia with a drowning man's gratitude. "Are you sure you've read his file? The allergies, the preferences, the quirks." "I have," Amelia replied calmly. "No dairy, no shellfish, no nightshades. Water must be Icelandic glacial, served at precisely 7 degrees Celsius. He prefers his steak cooked, using the sous vide method, and then seared for exactly 45 seconds on each side. And he is not to be addressed unless he initiates the conversation." Henderson was momentarily impressed. "Very good. The table is yours. Anything you need, anything at all, you come to me. Do not engage him. Do not provoke him. Be a ghost, a polite, efficient ghost." "I understand," Amelia said. She straightened her apron, her heart beating a steady rhythmic tattoo against her ribs. It wasn't fear she felt, but a focused, clinical curiosity. She was walking into a storm, yes, but she had always been good at finding the eye of the hurricane. As she walked towards table 12 to make the final preparations, she overheard Robert mutter to Jessica, "They're sending a lamb to the slaughter." Amelia allowed herself a small private smile. They had no idea. She was no lamb. She was a shepherd who had simply lost her flock, and she was not afraid of a lone, angry wolf. The main doors of Ethelgard's swung open, and a hush fell over the dining room. It was as if the air itself had been sucked out of the room, replaced by a tangible electric pressure. Damien Blackwood did not simply enter a room, he conquered it. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a dark, bespoke suit that probably cost more than Amelia's car, and moved with the predatory grace of a panther. His face was all sharp angles and severe lines, his dark hair streaked with a distinguished silver at the temples. But it was his eyes that held the room captive. They were the color of a winter sky, cold, clear, and utterly devoid of warmth. He was followed by his assistant, a woman named Genevieve, who looked as professionally polished and emotionally vacant as her boss. She spoke in low tones to the host, who nodded nervously before gesturing towards Henderson. Henderson scurried forward, his smile fixed and painful. "Mr. Blackwood, an honor to have you with us this evening. Your table is ready." Blackwood didn't acknowledge him. His gaze swept the room with an air of profound boredom, as if he were surveying a kingdom that had long ceased to entertain him. He moved towards table 12. Genevieve trailing in his wake. Amelia stood a respectful distance away, her hands clasped behind her back. She watched as he settled into the booth, shrugging off his jacket without a word and letting it fall for Genevieve to catch. He didn't thank her. The assistant placed the jacket on the empty seat, murmured something about a call at 10 and retreated to wait at the bar, a silent sentinel. This was it. The performance had begun. Following Henderson's ghost protocol, Amelia waited. She didn't approach. She simply stood, her posture perfect, her expression neutral. 1 minute passed, then 2. Blackwood was studying the wine list, his finger tracing a line down the page. The silence was a weapon designed to make the server fidget, to make them sweat. Amelia remained still, her breathing slow and even. She had once waited for 7 hours outside an operating room. 2 minutes was nothing. Finally, without looking up, he spoke. His voice was a low, resonant baritone that cut through the restaurant's ambient noise. "Water." It was a command, not a request. "Of course," Amelia replied, her voice steady. She moved to the table, her steps silent and sure. She had already prepared it. From a silver ice bucket, she produced the bottle of Icelandic glacial water. Using a digital thermometer she'd borrowed from the kitchen, she had ensured its temperature was exactly 7 degrees Celsius. She presented the bottle for his inspection before pouring a small amount into his glass. He picked up the glass, not to drink, but to scrutinize it. He held it up to the light, turning it slowly. The glass is smudged. Amelia had personally polished it 3 times. She knew it was immaculate. "My apologies, sir. Allow me to replace it." She retrieved the glass and returned with another one she had kept in reserve. She performed the ritual again, pouring the water with a steady hand. He gave a curt, dismissive nod and returned to his menu. Round 1 to Amelia. She hadn't flinched. "Are you new?" he asked, his eyes still fixed on the menu. The question was an accusation. "I have been here for a month, sir," she answered. "A month?" He mused the words, dripping with condescension. Henderson must be getting desperate, firing the competent ones and hiring transient help. The insult was designed to sting, to imply she was temporary, unimportant. Amelia felt a flicker of heat, but immediately extinguished it. This was a test. Everything was a test. "Is there anything I can assist you with regarding the menu?" she asked, deftly, redirecting the conversation back to her duties. He finally lifted his eyes and looked at her. Really looked at her. It was an unnerving experience, like being X-rayed. His gaze was analytical, searching for a weakness. He found none in her calm demeanor. The Wagyu, sous vide 130 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 hours, seared on a cast-iron skillet, clarified butter, only 45 seconds per side. The skillet must be at 500 degrees, not 499, not 501. Can your chef handle that, or is he as transient as you are? Our chef is exceptionally precise, sir. I will convey your instructions personally. See that you do, he said, closing the menu and sliding it across the table. And bring me the Cheval Blanc, 1947. Amelia's mind raced. The Cheval Blanc 1947 was one of the most legendary and expensive wines in the world. Their cellar had one bottle valued at over $24,000. It was a power play, a casual display of immense wealth designed to intimidate. An excellent choice, sir, Amelia said, her voice betraying no surprise. I will have our sommelier present it. No, he countered immediately. You will present it. I want to see if you know how to handle a wine that costs more than your annual salary. The cruelty was so casual, so matter-of-fact. Jessica would have burst into tears. Robert would have seethed with impotent rage. Amelia simply nodded. As you wish, sir. She retrieved the bottle with the reverence it deserved, her hands steady as she presented the label to him. She recited its history, its vintage notes, its legendary status, her knowledge drawn from hours of study. She opened it, not with a modern corkscrew, but with a traditional arso, a two-pronged opener that required immense skill to avoid damaging the old fragile cork. The cork came out clean. The entire dining room, including a stunned Mr. Henderson, seemed to be holding its breath. She poured a small amount for him to taste. He swirled it, sniffed it, and finally took a sip. He closed his eyes for a moment, and for the first time, a flicker of something other than contempt crossed his face. It was almost appreciation. Acceptable. He murmured the highest praise he was likely capable of giving. The meal progressed in this fashion. Each course was a new battleground. The asparagus spears were not of uniform length. The sauce had a hint of an unidentifiable spice he found pedestrian. The lighting above his table was casting a shadow on the left side of his plate. With every complaint, Amelia listened patiently. She never argued. She never made excuses. She simply acknowledged his observation and rectified the issue immediately and efficiently. She had the asparagus replated. She had the chef confirm the sauce ingredients there was no errant spice. She had maintenance discreetly adjust the dimmer on his light. She was a calm, immovable object meeting his unstoppable force. He was growing visibly frustrated, not because of her failures, but because of her success. He was trying to provoke a reaction, and her refusal to provide one was its own form of defiance. Finally, the main course was cleared, and he was nursing the last of his wine. He had been silent for several minutes, watching her. The final, most personal attack was coming. She could feel it. "You're very composed," he said, his voice soft and dangerous. "Where did you learn to be so servile? Did you major in it at some second-rate community college?" "I was a medical student at Northwestern, sir," she replied, her voice even. This gave him pause. His eyes narrowed. "Were you? What happened? Couldn't handle the pressure? Did you find diagnosing real problems more difficult than pouring water?" He was probing, looking for the wound. He wanted to hear a story of failure, of mediocrity, to confirm his worldview that everyone around him was beneath him. Amelia looked him directly in the eye, her composure unwavering. "I left to care for my mother after she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. The pressure of that situation makes this one feel manageable." The air crackled. She had not only answered his question, but had volleyed back a truth so profound and personal that it hung in the air between them like a physical object. She had shown him her wound, but not as a weakness. She had shown it to him as the source of her strength. He was momentarily speechless. His mask of cruel indifference slipped, and for a fleeting second she saw something else in his cold eyes, a flicker of shock, of recognition. It was there and gone in an instant. He leaned back, his jaw tight. He was used to people cowering. He was not used to being met with quiet, unyielding dignity. He was a storm, and she was the deep, silent ocean beneath it, absorbing his fury without being changed by it. He pushed his chair back abruptly. "The bill!" He snapped, his voice rough. Amelia produced it instantly. He threw a black credit card onto the table without looking at it. She took it, processed the payment, and returned with the slip for him to sign. He scribbled a signature, stood up, and walked out of the restaurant without a backward glance. Genevieve, his assistant, scrambled to follow. The staff let out a collective sigh of relief as the doors swung shut behind him. Jessica rushed over to Amelia. "Are you okay? What did he do? What did he say?" "He was just a customer," Amelia said, picking up the bill folder. Robert came over, a look of grudging respect on his face. "Kid, I don't know how you did it, but you survived." Amelia opened the folder to retrieve the merchant copy of the receipt. She stopped. Her eyes widened. The bill had been for $26,450, mostly for the wine. On the tip line, where she expected a zero, or perhaps a deliberately insulting single dollar, Damian Blackwood had written in a clear, bold hand, $26,450. A 100% tip. She stared at it, her mind reeling. It wasn't a reward. It was a statement. It was a puzzle. It was a surrender. Or perhaps it was something else entirely. Mr. Henderson approached, looking at the slip in her hand. His jaw dropped. "My God," he whispered. "No one has ever done that. No one." Amelia looked at the receipt, then towards the empty door where the billionaire had vanished. The money was life-changing, but it wasn't the money that consumed her thoughts. It was the question. Why, what had happened in that final exchange? Her calm reply, the one born from her own private grief, had somehow pierced his impenetrable armor. She hadn't just served him dinner. She had inadvertently shown him a mirror, and it seemed the reflection had shaken him to his very core. The storm had passed, but Amelia had a sinking feeling that the hurricane was just beginning. The $26,000 tip became the stuff of legend at Ethelgard's almost overnight. The story, embellished with each telling, spread through the Chicago service industry like wildfire. By the next morning, Amelia Vance was no longer the new girl. She was the Blackwood Whisperer. Her colleagues treated her with a newfound reverence, a mixture of awe and morbid curiosity. They asked her for details, wanting to know the secret, the magic words she'd used to tame the beast. "I just did my job," Amelia would say, a simple truth that no one seemed to believe. The money, when Mr. Henderson confirmed it, was not a mistake, and that it was all hers, as per restaurant policy, for dedicated servers, felt unreal. It sat in her bank account, a staggering sum that could erase a significant portion of her mother's medical debt in one fell swoop. It was a relief so profound it felt like a weight being lifted from her soul, but it was accompanied by a deep sense of unease. The tip felt less like a gesture of gratitude and more like a form of communication she couldn't decipher. It was too much, too loud. It was a desperate act. For 2 days, life at the restaurant returned to a semblance of normality, albeit with Amelia now at the center of its mythology. Robert stopped calling her Kid and started asking her opinion on wine pairings. Jessica followed her around like a disciple, hoping some of Amelia's mystical composure would rub off on her. Mr. Henderson gave her the best sections every night, treating her not just as an employee, but as a valuable, almost supernatural asset. Amelia tried to ignore it, focusing on her work, on the familiar rhythm of service. She sent a large portion of the money to the hospital's billing department, an act that brought her a sharp, clean pang of joy. But in the quiet moments while polishing silverware or folding napkins, her mind would drift back to table 12. She would replay the evening, dissecting every word, every gesture. She kept returning to that final moment, the look in Damien Blackwood's eyes when she mentioned her mother. It wasn't just shock. It was a deep, haunted recognition, as if her pain was a language he understood fluently. The phone call came on Thursday afternoon during the pre-service lull. The hostess answered, and her eyes immediately widened. She put the caller on hold, her hand trembling slightly as she held the receiver out to Mr. Henderson. "It's for you," she mouthed, her voice a squeak. "It's Genevieve, Damien Blackwood's assistant." A familiar tension immediately seized the room. The staff froze. Every bad memory, every horror story came rushing back. "Did we do something wrong?" Jessica whispered to no one in particular. "Was the tip a trap?" Mr. Henderson smoothed his tie and took the call in his office, shutting the door firmly behind him. The staff waited in strained silence, trying to read the muffled tones of his voice through the wood. Amelia continued to set her tables, her movements deliberate and calm, though her heart had begun to beat a little faster. After 5 long minutes, Henderson emerged from his office. His face was pale and utterly bewildered. He looked less like a manager who had just received a complaint, and more like a man who had been told the sky was now plaid. He walked directly over to Amelia, ignoring the expectant faces of the other staff. "Amelia?" he began, his voice strained. "That was Genevieve." "Is there a problem, Mr. Henderson?" Amelia asked, her gaze steady. "No. Yes, I don't know what it is," he stammered, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Mr. Blackwood was impressed with your service." Robert snorted from across the room. "Impressed?" He showed his appreciation, with a tip big enough to buy a car. "What more does he want?" Henderson held up a hand to silence him, his eyes still locked on Amelia. "He would like to retain your services again. But not here." A confused murmur went through the staff. "I don't understand," Amelia said. "He is hosting a private dinner at his residence tomorrow evening. A single guest." Henderson explained his words, coming out in a rush. "He has requested that you and only you serve him. He is prepared to pay the restaurant a retainer for your time, and he will pay you directly $5,000 for the evening." The room fell silent. $5,000. For one night. It was an absurd, obscene amount of money for a few hours of work. But it wasn't the money that was shocking. It was the request itself. It was personal. It crossed a line between professional service and something far more intimate and strange. "To go to his house," Jessica gasped. "Alone." "His penthouse, actually," Henderson clarified, as if that made it any less intimidating. "Genevieve assured me that all professional protocols would be observed. A car will be sent for you. You will have a full kitchen staff at your disposal there, led by his private chef. You would simply be overseeing the service as you did here." Amelia's mind was spinning. This went far beyond a demanding customer. This was an obsession. Her composure, her refusal to break had intrigued him. He wanted to study her, to understand her. He was taking her out of the controlled environment of the restaurant and bringing her into his own domain, the lion's den itself. "You don't have to do this, Amelia," Henderson said, his concern sounding genuine for the first time. "It is a highly unorthodox request. I can tell them you're unavailable." Amelia thought about the offer. It was terrifying. It was bizarre. But it was also an opportunity. Not just for the money, which would be another massive step towards financial freedom for her family, but for something else. To solve the puzzle. To understand the why behind the tip behind the haunted look in his eyes. Her medical training had taught her to be a diagnostician, to look at symptoms and trace them back to the root cause. Damien Blackwood was a man exhibiting symptoms of a profound sickness of the soul, and her curiosity, both clinical and human, was too strong to ignore. She thought of her mother, whose strength in the face of unimaginable pain was a constant source of inspiration. Her mother never shied away from a challenge. "When is the car coming?" Amelia asked. Henderson blinked. "You'll do it." "Yes," she said, her voice firm. "I'll do it." Robert just shook his head, a look of disbelief on his face. "You're either the bravest person I've ever met, or you're walking into a trap I can't even begin to imagine." "Perhaps," Amelia replied, meeting his gaze. "But sometimes the only way to understand a storm is to walk directly into its center." The next evening, as a sleek, black Rolls-Royce Phantom purred to a stop outside her modest apartment building, Amelia took a deep breath. She was dressed in a simple, elegant black dress, provided by Genevieve, a far cry from her server's uniform. She looked less like a waitress and more like one of Blackwood's esteemed guests. As the driver held the door for her, she felt a profound sense of stepping over a threshold, leaving the familiar world behind. She was no longer just Amelia Vance, the waitress. She was entering the personal, rarefied world of Damien Blackwood, and she had no idea what she would find there. The unsettling aftermath of their first encounter was over, and the true test was about to begin. The elevator to Damien Blackwood's penthouse was a silent, mirrored capsule that ascended the final 10 floors of one of Chicago's tallest residential skyscrapers. It moved with such unnerving speed and smoothness that Amelia felt a sense of vertigo, as if she were being transported to another realm entirely. The doors opened not into a hallway, but directly into the heart of the apartment itself. The word apartment felt woefully inadequate. It was a cavern of glass, steel, and marble. The main living area was a 2-story atrium with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking 180-degree panorama of the glittering city below. The view was spectacular, but the space itself was cold and impersonal. The furniture was minimalist and severe: a black leather sofa, a glass coffee table, a single abstract painting on a vast white wall that was more about aggressive slashes of color than any discernible form. There were no photographs, no books left out, no clutter. It wasn't a home, it was a gallery curated to display power and wealth as sterile and soulless as a billionaire's balance sheet. Genevieve was waiting for her, a clipboard in hand. "Ms. Vance, welcome. Mr. Blackwood will be with you shortly. His guest has just arrived. Please let me show you to the dining area and the kitchen." Amelia followed her across the polished marble floor, her sensible heels clicking in the silence. The dining room was dominated by a long, dark wood table that could easily seat 20, but was set tonight for only 2. The kitchen was a chef's dream, a gleaming stainless steel paradise where a small, focused team was already at work under the direction of a stern-looking man in chef's whites. "This is Chef Antoine," Genevieve said. "He has the menu. Your role is simply to ensure the service is seamless. You will not be required to carry plates. You will direct the junior staff I have hired for the evening. Your only direct interaction will be with Mr. Blackwood at the table." Chef Antoine gave Amelia a curt nod, his eyes sizing her up with professional skepticism. Amelia met his gaze with a calm nod of her own. She was not here to interfere with his art, only to present it. "Thank you, Genevieve," Amelia said. "I understand my role." Genevieve seemed to approve of her no-nonsense demeanor. "Excellent. Mr. Blackwood is dining with Mr. Hawthorne of Hawthorne Global. It is a delicate business dinner. Discretion is paramount." With that, she vanished back into the vastness of the apartment. Amelia took a moment to center herself. This was a different game. The stakes were higher. She was not just a server now, she was a paid performer in a high-stakes corporate drama. When Damien Blackwood finally entered the dining room with his guest, the atmosphere changed instantly. He wore a dark grey suit, no tie, the top button of his shirt undone. He looked more relaxed than he had at the restaurant, but his eyes still held that same intensity. His guest, a portly man in his 60s with a florid face, was laughing a little too loudly at something Blackwood had said. "And so I told him the deal is the deal. My signature is not an invitation for further negotiation," Blackwood was saying as they sat down. He caught Amelia's eye across the room. He didn't smile, but he gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was an acknowledgement, an instruction. "Begin." Amelia directed the service with quiet, efficient gestures. The first course was served. The wine was poured. She moved like a phantom at the edge of the room, observing, listening. The conversation was all business, mergers, acquisitions, market fluctuations. Blackwood was a master negotiator, his words precise and sharp, dismantling Mr. Hawthorne's arguments with surgical skill. But as the dinner wore on, Amelia noticed something. Blackwood was performing. He was playing the part of the ruthless titan of industry, but his heart wasn't in it. His eyes would occasionally drift towards the vast window, towards the endless sea of city lights, and his expression would go blank. The mask would slip for a fraction of a second, revealing a profound emptiness beneath. He was a king in a castle in the sky, completely and utterly alone. The deal was apparently struck over dessert. Mr. Hawthorne, looking both defeated and relieved, shook Blackwood's hand vigorously. "Damien, a pleasure as always. You drive a hard bargain, but a fair one." "It's the only kind I know," Blackwood replied, his voice flat. As Genevieve escorted the guest to the elevator, Blackwood remained at the table, swirling the last of the brandy in his glass. He gestured for Amelia to approach. The staff had already cleared the table and retreated to the kitchen, leaving them alone in the cavernous room. "You did well," he said. It was not a compliment. It was an assessment. "I was happy to be of service," Amelia replied, maintaining her professional distance. He stared into his brandy for a long moment. The silence stretched, filled only by the distant hum of the city. "That tip I left you," he said, suddenly not looking at her. "It was vulgar." Amelia was taken aback by the admission. "It was generous, sir." "It was an apology," he corrected, his voice low, "and a payment for your silence." He finally looked up, his eyes locking onto hers. "You said you left medical school to care for your mother. Northwestern. That's a top program. You must have been brilliant." "I was dedicated," she said simply. "And your mother?" He asked, his voice softer, now stripped of its usual armor. "How is she?" "She passed away 6 months ago," Amelia said. The words came out without a tremor, a fact she had stated so many times it had become a shield. He flinched. It was a small, almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw, but she saw it. The mask was gone. In its place was a raw, unguarded vulnerability that was startling to witness. "I'm sorry," he said, and the words sounded real. Not polite, not perfunctory, but deeply, achingly real. He stood up and walked over to the vast window, turning his back to her. He stared down at the city lights, a million tiny, anonymous lives spread out below him. My wife, Evelyn, and my daughter, Sophia. He began, his voice thick with an emotion he had clearly suppressed for years. They died 5 years ago. A car accident. A drunk driver ran a red light. I was on a business trip in Tokyo, closing a deal, the biggest of my career. He paused, his shoulders tense. Amelia remained silent, giving him the space to speak. She felt a profound shift in the room. She was no longer a server, she was a confessor. "I built all this," he said, gesturing vaguely at the opulent room the city beyond. "I thought if I could conquer the world, I could control it. I thought if I made enough money, I could build a fortress so high that nothing could ever hurt me again. But grief doesn't respect wealth. It seeps through the cracks in the marble. It echoes in the silence of empty rooms." He turned to face her, and his eyes were filled with a torment so profound it was like looking into an abyss. "I became this monster. I punish waiters for smudged glasses because I couldn't stop a drunk driver. I demand perfection in my steak because my own life is so irrevocably imperfect. I make people feel small because it's the only way I can feel anything at all. It's pathetic." The confession hung in the air, stark and brutal in its honesty. This was the source of the poison. This was the sickness, the entitlement, the cruelty. It was all a desperate, misdirected scream of pain. Amelia felt a wave of empathy so powerful it almost knocked her off her feet. She wasn't looking at a billionaire. She was looking at a man drowning in grief who had been treading water alone for 5 years. She took a hesitant step forward. Her training, both medical and personal, took over. "Grief isn't a problem to be solved, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice soft but firm. "It's not a negotiation you can win. It's a space you have to learn to live inside. It changes shape, but it never truly leaves you." She thought of her own grief for her mother, the quiet ache that was now a part of her. "My mother used to say that losing someone you love is like having a limb amputated. You learn to live without it. But you wake up every morning, and for a split second you forget it's gone. And then you remember. The phantom pain is real." He stared at her, his expression one of utter astonishment. She had given his pain a name. She had validated it. She hadn't offered platitudes or cheap sympathy. She had offered a shared, terrible truth. "How?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "How do you learn to live inside it?" "You don't do it alone," Amelia said simply. "You learn to carry it, and sometimes you let someone else help you hold it for a little while." He looked around the vast, empty penthouse at the cold marble and sterile art, and for the first time seemed to see it for what it was, a beautiful, luxurious, multi-million-dollar tomb. He walked over to a discreet panel on the wall and pressed it. A section of the wall slid away, revealing a small, simple wooden frame. It was a photograph of a smiling woman with warm eyes, and a little girl with a gap-toothed grin, her arms wrapped around her mother's neck. Evelyn and Sophia. Tears welled in Damien Blackwood's eyes, real unashamed tears. He didn't wipe them away. "I haven't looked at this in 4 years," he confessed, his voice choked. Amelia stood beside him, a silent witness to the cracking of a dam of sorrow. She hadn't come here to serve dinner. She had been summoned to hear a confession, to witness a breaking point. The lion was not in his den. He was in his cage, and he was finally desperately asking for a key. The silence that followed Damien's confession was not empty. It was filled with the weight of 5 years of unspoken grief. He stood before the photograph of his wife and daughter, the tears tracing paths down his stoic face, washing away the years of carefully constructed cruelty. Amelia did not speak. She simply stood with him, her quiet presence a testament to the fact that he was, for the first time, in a very long time, not alone in his pain. After several minutes that felt like an eternity, he finally turned away from the photograph, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. The gesture was raw and uncharacteristically human. He looked at Amelia, his gaze stripped of all its former arrogance. He looked exhausted, but also lighter, as if a great burden had been momentarily lifted. "The $5,000 for tonight," he said, his voice raspy. "It's an insult." Amelia was about to protest, to say it was more than generous, but he held up a hand. "It's an insult for what you've done," he clarified. "You weren't a server tonight. You were something else. Something I didn't know I needed." He walked over to the severe black desk in the corner of the room, a place that looked like the command center for his global empire. He sat down, but the imperious aura was gone. He just looked like a man in a very expensive chair. "I have a proposition for you, Amelia," he said, his tone now that of a businessman, but a far different one from the man who had eviscerated Mr. Hawthorne a few hours earlier. "It is unorthodox. You are free to refuse, and I will have a car take you home with the promised payment and my sincere gratitude. There will be no repercussions." Amelia waited, her heart pounding with a mixture of apprehension and intrigue. "I want to hire you," he said. "Not as a waitress, not as an assistant. I have dozens of those. I want to hire you to help me hold it." He gestured vaguely, referring to the grief that filled the room. "You said that's what one needs, someone to help them carry it." Amelia was stunned into silence. He wanted to hire her as what, a grief counselor, a professional friend. The idea was absurd. "I want you to teach me how to live again." He continued, leaning forward, his intensity now focused on a goal, not of acquisition, but of restoration. How to walk into a park, how to order a coffee without finding fault in the foam, how to exist in a world where they don't. His voice cracked on the last word. "Mr. Blackwood." "Damien," Amelia started correcting herself. "I'm not a therapist. I'm not a psychologist. My training was in medicine in the body, not the mind." "You're wrong," he countered immediately. "Your training was in healing. You saw a sickness in me that night at the restaurant, a sickness no one else ever dared to name. You didn't flinch from it. You looked it right in the eye. That is more valuable than 100 PhDs in psychology who would just bill me by the hour to tell me things I already know." He named a salary. It was a number so astronomical that Amelia's mind struggled to process it. It was more than the chief of surgery at a major hospital made. It was a figure that would not only clear her family's debts, but would secure her future, her siblings' futures, for the rest of their lives. It was life-altering, world-changing money. "Your job," he explained, "would be simple in its description and impossible in its execution. You would meet with me a few times a week. You would set the agenda. You would take me out of this mausoleum," he said, looking around the penthouse with newfound disgust. "And you would help me find my way back. You would be my humanity consultant." A humanity consultant? The title was as bizarre and audacious as the man himself. Amelia's mind was a whirlwind of conflict. The offer was a lifeline, a golden ticket out of the financial desperation that had been her constant companion for years. But it was also a gilded cage. To step into this role would be to bind herself to this deeply damaged, powerful man. It was a journey into the uncharted territory of another person's soul, a path fraught with unpredictable dangers. What if she failed? What if his grief was a chasm too deep to bridge? She thought of her conversation with Mr. Henderson just before she'd left the restaurant. He had pulled her aside, his face etched with worry. "Be careful, Amelia," he had warned in a low voice. "Blackwood isn't just a monster. He's a target. You know his biggest rival is Sterling Thorne." Amelia had nodded. "Thorne's company has been trying to poach my staff for months," Henderson had confessed. "Not to hire them, to pump them for information. They're looking for any sign of weakness, any instability in Blackwood. They're circling him like sharks, waiting for a drop of blood in the water. A hostile takeover bid is rumored to be in the works. If they get wind that Blackwood is emotionally compromised, they'll use it to destroy him, to argue he's unfit to lead his own company." The warning echoed in her mind now with chilling clarity. Damien's vulnerability wasn't just a personal matter, it was a corporate liability. And if she took this job, she would become the keeper of his most dangerous secret. Her involvement wouldn't just be personal, it would place her squarely in the crosshairs of a ruthless corporate war. Sterling Thorne was known for being even more ruthless than Blackwood, but without any of the tragic backstory to excuse it. "This is not a simple request," Amelia said, choosing her words carefully. "My involvement with you in this capacity could be misinterpreted. It could be used against you." Damien waved a dismissive hand. "Sterling Thorne has been trying to find a chink in my armor for a decade. Let him try. This is more important than any company, any deal. What's the point of owning the world if you're not even living in it?" He saw the hesitation in her eyes, the conflict. He didn't press. He simply waited, giving her the space and respect to make her own decision. It was a stark contrast to the demanding tyrant from the restaurant. Amelia looked at him, truly looked at him. She saw the broken man behind the billions. She saw the father who had lost his daughter, the husband who had lost his wife. And she saw a flicker of the man he must have been before the tragedy, the man Evelyn and Sophia had loved it. Healing him wasn't just about him. It was about honoring their memory, about proving that the love they gave him wasn't buried with them. Her own loss felt suddenly very present. She knew the depths of that particular ocean, and she knew that no one should have to swim in it alone. The money was a factor, yes, but it was no longer the driving one. This was a calling, a strange, unexpected, and terrifying calling. "I will accept," she said, her voice clear and resolved, "but on my own terms." A flicker of the old Damien Blackwood appeared. "Terms?" "Yes," Amelia said firmly, establishing the new dynamic from the outset. "First, this is a professional arrangement. Our time together is confidential, but I am not your employee in the traditional sense. I am a consultant. I set the schedule and the location of our sessions." He nodded, accepting. "Second," she continued, "you must be completely honest with me always, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult." "Agreed," he said without hesitation. "And third," she said, her voice softening slightly, "you have to be willing to do the work. I can show you the path, but I can't walk it for you. You have to be prepared to feel the pain you've been running from for 5 years. He looked towards the photograph of his family, his expression a mixture of fear and determination. "I am," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm ready." He extended his hand across the desk. It was not a gesture of dominance, but one of partnership. Amelia shook it. His grip was firm, his hand surprisingly warm. In that moment, a new contract was sealed. It was a contract not of service or employment, but of hope. As their hands clasped, Amelia couldn't shake the feeling of Henderson's warning. She had just agreed to help a man heal, but in doing so, she may have just stepped into the middle of a war she was completely unprepared to fight. Amelia's first act as Damien's humanity consultant was to dismantle his defenses. She flatly rejected his suggestions of private museum tours and yacht lunches, all sterile environments designed to keep the real world out. Her instructions delivered over the phone were simple and non-negotiable. "Put on a pair of jeans and a sweater," she'd said. "I'll have a car pick you up at 10. And Damien, leave your wallet at home." The next morning, he slid into the back of a modest sedan, looking profoundly uncomfortable, a king stripped of his armor. Amelia, seated in the front, directed the driver not to a high-end retreat, but to a small, unassuming playground in Lincoln Park, vibrant with the laughter of children under the crisp autumn sky. He followed her to a park bench, his posture rigid. "A playground?" he asked, his voice laced with disbelief. "This is your grand plan for my rehabilitation." "The first step is simply to be," Amelia replied, calmly taking a seat, "to sit in a public place and not be the CEO. No demands, no expectations, just listen." He sat stiffly beside her, watching the scene with the wary eyes of a predator forced into a petting zoo. His discomfort was a palpable force. He was a man utterly alien to this world of simple, mundane joy. Amelia didn't push. She let the silence and the ordinary sounds of life do the work. Then it happened. A little girl with bright pigtails ran to the swings, her squeals of "Higher, Daddy, higher!" echoing in the cool air. Damien flinched as if he'd been physically struck. His face went pale, his eyes locked on the girl. Sophia loved the swings. He whispered the words ragged and torn from a place deep inside him. "Tell me about her," Amelia said gently, her voice a quiet invitation. He swallowed hard, the memory pulling him back in time. "She had a laugh like that," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "A joyful roar. She wanted to swing so high her toes could touch the clouds." He pointed a trembling finger toward the very same swing set. "We used to come here, to this park." A single tear traced a path down his cheek. He was no longer the titan of industry. He was a father drowning in a memory. In the safety of the moment, he began to speak, sharing small, precious details of the daughter he had lost. Amelia simply listened, her steady presence an anchor in his storm of grief. When they finally stood to leave, the rigid tension in his shoulders had eased. "Thank you," he said, the two words carrying the weight of a 5-year burden. "This is the work," Amelia replied softly. She felt a flicker of hope, a sense that this impossible journey was in fact possible. But as the car pulled away from the curb, her gaze drifted to the side view mirror. She saw it for a split second, a parked sedan, and a man inside lowering a camera with a long telephoto lens. Her blood ran cold. Mr. Henderson's warning about his rival Sterling Thorne screamed in her mind. They're looking for any sign of weakness, a drop of blood in the water. The photograph wouldn't show a grieving father taking a brave first step. It would show the powerful Damien Blackwood, broken and tearful in a public park. It was the perfect ammunition. Amelia realized with sickening clarity that she hadn't just opened the door to Damien's healing. She had opened the door to his ruin, and she was standing right in the blast radius. What started as a waitress's refusal to be broken became a journey into the heart of a man's secret sorrow. Amelia, armed only with empathy, did what no one else could. She saw the human being behind the billion-dollar fortress. But healing Damien Blackwood has come at a cost. His newfound vulnerability is now a weapon in the hands of his most ruthless rival, Sterling Thorne. The photographs taken in that park are more than just images. They are ammunition in a corporate war that could destroy everything Damien has built and expose Amelia to dangers she never imagined. His fight for his soul has become a fight for his empire, and she is at the very center of the storm. Did you find this story of unexpected connection and hidden battles compelling? If so, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with someone who loves a dramatic story, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next chapter in Amelia and Damien's incredible story. What happens when the photos leak? Click that subscribe button and ring the bell to find out.